What's up, guys? This is Coach Grant with First Down Training, and today we're going to be talking about things that every wide receiver needs to know in 2025. So this first example here is we're going to talk about why wide receivers need to learn how to close the space versus something called catch technique, which is something that a lot of wide receivers don't do. So we're going to play this clip full speed here of this 10-yard out route that this wide receiver runs versus a DB who is in catch technique inside shade. Now, ultimately drops the ball here, but this is a great route, great example for us to look at. Obviously, just have to be able to finish the play, but that's a different conversation. So pre-snap, anytime that you were coming off the line of scrimmage as a wide receiver, we're trying to identify two things on the DB. We're trying to look for his leverage. So is he shaded to the inside? That means he has inside leverage. Is he shaded to the outside? That means he has outside leverage. Or is he right in front of my face, right? So what is his leverage? Because that kind of tells me what he's trying to protect. Now, in this kind of angle, it's tough to tell, but you could look by checking the midline of the DB's body, which is like an imaginary line just down the middle of him. And if his midline is even with our front foot, that means his inside foot is going to be slightly shaded to the inside, which means that he's inside leverage. So he's trying to take away the inside route. That's why it's important to know that, because we're trying to determine what is he trying to do here? What's his goal with this coverage? Now, the second thing we want to look for is distance. So is he right up on the line of scrimmage, right in my face? Probably going to get hands, probably going to get physical, because that would change up the release that I would use. Is he 2 yards away? Because that would change up the release that I would use. Is he 5 yards away? That would change up the release that I would use. So those are the two things we want to look for. So catch technique is when he's probably around 2 yards away. His goal is to maintain this gap of space that he has between me right now as a wide receiver. So off the ball, set, go, he wants to start inching back and keeping this space, because eventually as a wide receiver, we have to get up into my route. So if he can maintain that space, this receiver eventually has to go. So if he goes and we have this gap of space, this wide receiver or this DB can cut off our angle, get hands on us, disrupt the timing of the route, or force us all the way to the sideline, because obviously we're running a 10-yard out. So what we always want to do as a wide receiver, no matter what coverage it is, we want to try to get skinny, which means we want to run as tight as we can to this DB so we could try to stack him, which means we want the DB trailing behind me. So I can give him a fake to the inside, a move to the inside, and ultimately be able to create some separation. But if he maintains that distance, I can't do that. So it's important, fellas, against catch technique as a wide receiver, we have to close the distance. Now, when this wide receiver does his crossover, he does more of like a vertical crossover where he's going this way at the DB. How that changes based on the coverage is this. If he's right up on the line of scrimmage, his first step on his crossover would not be vertical. It would be more of a lateral step, and then he would jab back to the inside to attack his leverage. The reason why we want to look for the DB's leverage, we want to attack his leverage. Best way to get him to move, best way to get him off balance is make him think we're running where he doesn't want me to go. So it's a combination. We have to attack his leverage, but we also have to close the distance. So you need to know that, fellas, because DBs will play this catch technique when they are trying to be patient. So when we do close that distance, you see how he's able to get right past this DB's hip. Could he have gotten a little bit skinnier and gotten more vertical? Absolutely. I think he went a little wide with his release here, but because he was able to do that, we're able to beat this DB to the angle. Right? We attack his leverage. We close the space. We're able to cut off that angle. He can't cut off my angle on the route. So when I'm bursting up into my vertical stem of the route here, I could stack him. We give him a move. Maybe he's a little off balance again. And you see all this space I gave the quarterback by also getting skinny. If that DB gets hands and cuts off my angle and my out route's right on the sideline, quarterback ain't throwing that ball. So that's why it's important to close the space, fellas. It's important for our separation. It's important for route spacing, route timing, but also just generally how we run the route. So I'm going to play it again full speed. Great example of a more vertical crossover move to close that space versus a catch technique DB. Obviously got to finish with a catch. Now, next example we're going to talk about is a wide receiver and explaining to you the importance of a tempo change. And I think all wide receivers need to understand how to use tempo, but without sacrificing timing. I think a lot of wide receivers try to do what this receiver is going to do right here in this example, but it wastes a bunch of time. And their coaches get pissed. They get on them. Hey, stop wasting time. Just run your route. But we're going to talk about an efficient way to do that. Now, before we get into this video clip, fellas, if you are a wide receiver or even a quarterback watching this and you would like to train with myself and my staff of coaches this offseason, we're going to be traveling out to 15 different locations all across the country for 2-day-long QB and wide receiver training camps. Now, we've already done 3 camps this year in San Francisco, Orlando, and Phoenix. All 3 of those camps, great turnout. We appreciate anybody that came, and they were all sold out. Our next 2 in Charlotte and Austin will be sold out as well, but we do have available spots still. They're filling up quick, guys. These next 3 will probably sell out this week in Las Vegas, Seattle and Chicago. Then we'll be heading out to Newark, Birmingham, Houston, Boston, Columbus, Boise, and Los Angeles. So you guys, so fellas, take advantage while we still have available spots. If you go to that very first link in the description below, again, very first link in the description below, that's where you could sign up for our Vegas all the way to Los Angeles camp. So we'd love to have you there, guys. 2 full days of training. We limit spots. That's why they sell out, because we want to actually get individualized work with you and work with you one-on-one so we could actually help your game. Camps will not help your game if you're just getting a bunch of reps and not getting individualized coaching, and that's the opposite of what we do. We want to give you guys as much coaching as possible, as much detailed work as possible to really help you improve. So guys, very first link in that description below. We'd love to have you there. Let's get back to this video. So this wide receiver is going to be running a corner route, and it's going to be like, I would say like a 7 to 8 yard corner versus a DB who's sitting outside leverage. This is kind of like more so off man coverage at about like 6 yards, like 6 to 7 yards, right? So obviously, off the line of scrimmage, when it comes to picking my route, we talked about this in the last example. What do I want to look for? I want to look for leverage and distance. So he's outside leverage. Okay, cool. That tells me he doesn't want me to go to the outside. Kind of a problem a little bit because I have to run a corner or an out route or something to the outside, right? Now, I also want to look for distance. He's about 6 yards away. Okay, so that probably tells me if I have to run like a 7 to 8 yard corner route, I'm probably not going to be able to attack his leverage and close the space, give him a move, and then release inside and try to stack him because I just don't have that kind of time. You don't have that kind of time because it's just like your route's literally a yard deeper than where the DB is sitting. So this would be considered more so off man than catch technique, right? Now, if we had to run like a 15-yard corner, then that would change. You would attack his leverage. You'd close the space for 6 yards because now you have an additional 7 to 8 to be able to stack him and make a play. Now, but if we don't have that kind of space, we got to do something different. And we're going to talk about another route example of this on not just a corner in a second. So what he does, or what we need to do as a receiver, is we got to like essentially split the DB in half. We have to attack his inside shoulder and his inside hip and try to get him to flip open so we could cut underneath him, right? So it'd be the same way you would run a 10-yard out, same way you'd run a corner. So let's watch what this receiver does. Now, he doesn't just attack him. He uses that tempo change and then accelerates and cuts under him, right? So let's talk about it. So the reason why he uses this tempo change is that's more likely to get this DB to bite. What we're trying to make him think we're doing is we're running a seam. I want him to think, because he's out of the slot, obviously. He's not on the outside. If we're on the outside, like on the numbers, then we can make him think we're running a fade. But because we're out of the slot, we want to make him think we're running a seam. We're trying to just take him deep over the top. Now, if you were to actually run a seam, you wouldn't just take off and run. That's where disciplined DBs, like a lot of DBs watch our videos to see how a receiver thinks. So like a lot of DBs are like, oh, well, if he's just running hard and he's not like attacking me or not giving me a move, expect him to cut back outside. DBs are smart, guys. They watch a lot of film. They try to understand tendencies of what a wide receiver does. So we have to make it look exactly like how I'd run my fade. So if I was running a fade, I would give a little tempo change. I would slow things down to try to slow the DB's feet down, and then I would accelerate. I go from 0 to 100. Right? So that's what we want to make it look like even when I'm running back to the outside. Now, it has to be efficient. You can't take forever doing this. You can't do all these fancy like skips where you cross your feet and all this crap that I see receivers do. It's essentially just a double step. He takes a double step with his left foot. And this is any hezzy, quote unquote hezzy that you would use would be just a double step. So he's running and he just goes left, left, then he takes off. Then he puts the brakes on. But that simple tempo change into acceleration makes it look more like he's running a fade at his inside shoulder and inside hip, forces a reaction out of this DB, and we can put the brakes on and cut underneath him. But that tempo change is what does it, fellas. Now, against a scrub DB, like, could you just take off and run hard at his inside shoulder and inside hip? Yeah, you could do that. You could run hard. You could sell vertical, put your head down, and that dude might open up. But sometimes against more disciplined guys, you have to use something called a tempo change. So let's play this thing full speed. Great tempo change example from this receiver running that like 7 to 8 yard corner versus that DB who is at 6 to 8 yards. Now, let's talk about another example and another variation of that. So this wide receiver is going to be running a slant route versus a DB who's inside shade press, right? So remember the very first example, we talked about an out route, right? An out route was a route that was going away from this DB's leverage. So what did we have to do? We had to, if he was right up on the line of scrimmage, we don't got to close any space. We just have to threaten his leverage inside, release outside, and then break up into my route. Get skinny, try to stack him so we can get separation, but give the QB room, right? Now, if we have to run a slant, it's a 3-step slant. and we got this DB sitting inside shade press. I can't do that, give him a move inside, work outside, and try to stack him. I don't have that kind of time. So we got to do exactly how we would process it versus off man, that last example, right? It would be like if he was inside shade at like 7 yards and I had to run an 8-yard post, I wouldn't attack him for 7, then try to stack him to 8. I would go right at his outside shoulder and outside hip. So if he's sitting at 2 yards and I got to run a 3-step slant, I got to attack his outside shoulder and outside hip. Same thing though with that corner. We have to try to self-fade. I want to make this DB open up his hips, think that I'm going vertical, and cut underneath him. And that would be called a diamond release. You would take 3 hard steps at his outside shoulder and outside hip to try to open him up. Now, again, remember, DBs are smart, though, you guys. How would you run an actual fade route versus this specific coverage? You would give him a move inside to try to move the DB inside and then go vertical. So we got to do that. And that's what this receiver does. We can't just take off and run because a smart DB will expect that. He'll be like, he's not actually going fade because he doesn't normally run a fade like that unless you're doing a speed release after speed release after speed release when maybe you're not even getting the ball. But that's not the best way to get separation, in my opinion. So what this receiver does, he does a crossover, then he takes his diamond release, and that's more likely to get that DB to open up. Now, tight coverage, right? But that's a tough route to run versus that specific coverage. I think we all know that if you play wide receiver. So watch what he does here. So he comes off, he gives a little left-right, just a quick left-right move. Hold that DB's leverage. Make him think that it's a fade even more. 1, 2, 3. And we see how we get that DB to open up. We give that little crossover, then we accelerate. And those 3 steps is what will get him to open up. And the crossover will get him to open up even more and actually believe that we're running deep. Not that we're selling like we're running deep. We never want to make the DB think we're selling it. We want to make the DB think we're actually running it. And we will do that by setting it up with that initial crossover release. So great example here from Elijah Moore. Great job showing how you can get separation on a slant route versus inside shade press. So fellas, hope that video was able to help. Hope that got you to learn some new things. I know on this channel, we kind of repeat ourselves a lot because we really want to drill home the technique and the things that you need to do. But I hope that was some new information for you guys. So if there are any other videos you'd like to see, any other feedback, fellas, feel free, post that in the comment section below. We read all your comments and we appreciate all of the support. So guys, I'll talk to you later. See you next time.